Support Lightning Debate on Patreon.
Hi guys, Jeff here, and I'm here with part 6 of the LD for Dummies series, and this time we're going to be covering rebuttals and closing. So all from the first rebuttal all the way to the last rebuttal, what you should be doing in your speeches. So before we go into that, we're just going to recap what we covered in the series so far. In part 1, we covered how to write your framework. In part 2, we covered how to write your case. In part 3, we covered how to win on the framework. In part 4, we covered how to write critiques and how to respond to critiques. In part 5, we covered the anatomy of theory and theory shells and how to respond and write theory and respond to theory shells. And if you haven't seen any of these previous parts in the previous videos, or are you confused on any of these topics and you need a refresher, check them out. Links are in the description. All right, so first thing I want to cover is what you should be doing in your rebuttal. So first thing you want to do is identify your position. You want to make sure that you're able to make effective responses. You want to know that you understand their framework. You want to know they understand their contentions. You want to understand their sources and know what their sources are for each of their pieces of evidence that they bring up and each of their contentions. And you want to understand their path to the ballot. You understand what they are trying to do and how their case allows them to win the debate. If you don't understand any of these things, use flex prep or cross-examination to figure them out, because these are important things to know and understand even way before you even consider what you're going to say in response. All right, so next let's talk about strategy. There are multiple ways. In fact, there are 5 ways in order to make a rebuttal or negate. The first one is expose fallacy. The second one is discredit. The third one is reductio ad absurdum. The fourth one is a turn, and the fifth one is critique. So they're ranked in least difficult to pull off to most difficult to pull off, and that order. So let's go into the least difficult to pull off, which is exposing fallacy. So exposing fallacy just means that you say what your opponent said was factually correct. It requires good topic knowledge and the preparation of blocks and block files, which are cut cards that you have on hand that are responses to arguments that you know are common. So I'm going to show you how to write those block files in a later video, but let's just cover that for a later video. And just know that it's important to have good topic knowledge and understand the facts of the case and the facts that are present on that topic. And also remember to cite the information for the source you use when you expose your fallacy. Unless your source is not reputable, then keep that to yourself just for strategy cases. But generally, you want to have sources that are reputable to say that whatever they said was incorrect or untrue. All right, the next one would be discredit. So discredit says that the source for the information that your opponent uses is unreliable or does not meet an admissible evidence standard. So the reason why this is more complex than just exposing fallacy, because you need to explain why that their source or evidence is not credible or should not be used. So an examples of times when you can use the discredit attack is when you see articles from sources with high biases, like Huffington Post being extremely liberal or Breitbart being extremely conservative. So they might use things or make statements that are untrue just to further their political agendas. You see evidence from non-reputable sources like Wikipedia saying that's generally not true. They typically have evidence that's generally false on Wikipedia. That might be a good way to say that you're discrediting their evidence or discrediting their claim. Or if they use scientific and statistical studies and they don't have any methodology, meaning they don't tell you how they came up with this number or came up with the results of their study. For example, if you see they have a study saying 20% of people are opposed to this legislation. Oh, how did they figure out 20% of people are opposed to this legislation? I don't know. It doesn't say. That means they don't have methodology. If it doesn't have replication, 20% of people, we interviewed 20% of people. We interviewed 20% of people and they had shown that they're opposed to this legislation. Oh, how many people did they ask? They didn't know. We don't know how many people they asked. They just said they had asked people, and that's what 20% of them said. That doesn't have replication. You don't know how many people they asked, how many times they went over to see if that number is consistent. All right, and a small sample size. If they say they asked 100 people, Again, if you're talking about a nationwide issue like how Americans feel about abortion, asking 100 people is not an adequate enough sample size to get a good estimate on how Americans feel about abortion. You're going to need at least, and that's not even a lot enough, but at least 1,000 to maybe 10,000 people in order to create that sort of statistical variance and to get anything valid out of that. So if you see anything under 1,000 for something that's for a nationwide study, or under 100 for something that's like a statewide or a small area study, you're going to want to say that that's not really admissible evidence. That's not really good enough to show an actual correlation. All right, the third one is Reductio Ad Absurdum. So this is Latin for reduce to absurdity. What that means is that your objective is to make your opponent's assertions sound absurd if you put them in a different context. An example of this would be, an assertion would be, abortion is wrong because you are stopping the potential for life. All right, so to use Reductio Ad Absurdum, you make a claim, okay, if abortion is wrong because you're stopping the potential of life, that means stopping the potential for life is wrong. And thus, using any contraception in general would also be wrong because it does the same thing as abortion, which is stopping the potential for life. You see, now it sounds ridiculous to say, okay, since abortion is wrong, contraception is also wrong. So now that the logic between their assertion doesn't make any sense anymore. All right, the fourth one is a turn, where you're attempting to say that your opponent is causing the impacts they are warning will happen. So an example of a turn would be, let's say someone comes up to you saying, I'm cutting fat from my diet and I'm going to eat more carbs in order to lose more weight. And you bring them some research that tells them, actually, when you eat more carbs and eat less fat, you are actually going to gain more weight, not less weight. So when you're saying that you're trying to prevent weight gain rather, and what you're doing actually causes the weight gain that you're trying to prevent happen, that is a turn. You're saying, no, you're not preventing the thing that you're trying to prevent. You're actually causing the thing that you're trying to prevent. All right, and the last one is a critique. So a critique is an argument saying that the way the argument is presented causes quote unquote bad discourse. So an example of a critique would be something like an assertion like, wealthy nations should make decisions for other nations because they are more successful. And then the critique, not saying that what that statement is wrong, but the way the statement is phrased makes for toxic discourse, saying the use of the word other in regard to non-wealthy nations makes for toxic discourse by making it seem that a nation's value is dependent on its financial success, which is no way to talk about any group of people or government. So you're saying it's not that what you're saying is wrong, but the way you're talking about it makes it seem as if wealthy nations are now superior nations because they have more wealth, which is not the way we should judge whether or not a nation should make their own decisions or not. That shouldn't be a necessary barometer for that. And also, if you want to understand more on critiques, I have a dedicated video on there in part 4, was it? I don't remember which part it was, but I have a dedicated video on the subject on the channel. Check the playlist, check the link in the description. All right, now another thing to think about is time management. So it's important to understand how long it will take to make a particular argument. Exposed fallacy and discredit takes about 10 to 30 seconds, depending on how long you're talking about it. Turns and reductio ad absurdums take 15 seconds to a minute, depending on the complexity of the turn or the example you're using to use reductio ad absurdum. And a critique could take anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And of course, the asterisks, these are dependent on how fast you talk and the content of the argument and the context of the debate and all those sort of things. But these are just more loose estimates of how long they can take. And it also depends on how your style of speaking works. So you might tend to take more time or feel you need to make more time to explain something than might be necessary. All right, so next we're going to get into weighing. Okay, so there are 4 ways to weigh arguments. They're impact, ethos, probability, and using comparative worlds analysis. So we're just going to go over them right now. So impacts. Here you compare the consequences of your case to their case. It's usually on a line by line or individual level. So let's say I say on the AF, the greatest impact will be lost wages. However, this pales into comparison to massive loss of life and wide-scale harm to the environment. So you vote neg. So that's saying the impacts of the AF don't even match the impacts of the neg. Therefore, you should look to the AF on winning the round and on that level. Then there's ethos. You want to extend arguments where you use the discredit negation strategy against. So, for example, if you say all the studies I've read to you cover large numbers of people and have replicated numerous times by numerous people, the arguments of the negative are based on the opinions of politically biased reporters from an unreliable source. You're saying what they're saying is unreliable. You don't know if it's true. It's inaccurate. What I'm telling you is more accurate. You should vote for me because I'm giving you the most accurate information on the topic. Then there's probability. This is usually to negate impacts when you're losing on the impact level, to try and say it's more probable that your impacts will occur anyway compared to your opponents. So an example of this saying, even though my opponent states that the AF will cause nuclear war, the link chain specifies 6 different independent variables that have to go in a specific order to occur. So the likelihood of nuclear war is actually quite low, yet you can be sure the AF will save lives and boost the economy in the near future, which is why you vote AF. So you're saying you should vote on probability. Even if nuclear war is a large impact, the probability of it actually occurring is so small that it's probably not even going to matter whether or not you vote AF or neg if you to cause a nuclear war anyway. However, you know if you vote AF, you know for sure you're going to save lives and boost the economy. So it doesn't show you shouldn't vote neg to try to prevent the maybe possibility of a 1% chance of a nuclear war that might have happened anyway. All right. The next thing to go into are voting issues. So these are things that you should close every speech out with in order to help you weigh the round and prove to the judge that they should be voting for you and voting in your favor at the end. So the first thing you want to do is comparative worlds analysis. You want to compare the worlds that you and your opponent have created and basically compare the differences between the two cases and showing the judge how yours is superior. So an example for this, in the AF world, you see great peace. However, there's going to be less capital in the world. In the neg world, you see massive wars with high death counts, but the top 1% of the world gets more capital share. So it makes it obvious to the judge, on the AF world, you're going to see a much better world than the neg world. So you'd rather live in the AF world. That's why you vote AF. All right, the next thing is the framing Brightline. You want to talk about who wins the framework and how winning the framework impacts the round, and how winning a framework helps impact winning the debate in general. So an example would be, since my opponent has not negated my framework, while I have negated theirs, we need to use my framework to judge the round, and I'm the debater who best achieves my framework, so that should justify a ballot in my favor. Saying, okay, since I win the framework and I achieve the framework the best, we should use my framework to show that that is the thing that we should best figure out to achieve in this round. Since I'm the one who does that, you're voting for me. All right. And the last thing you want to talk about is the line by line. You generally just want to give a basic history of the debate so far and talk about what's happened so far in the debate to tell the judge who's winning each argument on each level. So if you're going to go on the line by line for the contentions, you want to go, okay, in contention 1, contention 2, they try to claim that wages will be lost. However, they don't respond to the turn on those contentions, so you cannot vote for them on that. Boom. You just tell them right now, if they were thinking or convinced about contention 1 or contention 2, you tell them that they can't vote on contention 1 and contention 2 because you've already responded to that, and they haven't responded to your response, so contention 1 and contention 2 provide no offense for them. All right, in contention 3, they use the Huffington Post article, which is politically biased, so ignore that evidence. So on contention 3, you show, okay, even if they bought that contention, you can't use it to help vote for them because they're using evidence that does not meet the basic evidence standard for the debate that you're setting, so don't ignore that. So now you've taken all of their offense. Then they try to turn my contentions 1 and 2, however, they're unable to produce evidence for it to validate their claim, so their turn fails. So now when they say, oh, I brought up a turn, they don't respond, you say, look, you can't even prove what your turn is saying is true. You have no evidence to prove your turn to be true. Therefore, your turn does not meet the evidentiary standards in order to win that argument. So now you should have clean offense on contention 1 and contention 2 to extend, and for the judge to say, okay, I'm voting on contention 1 and contention 2. They don't really adequately respond to that. So that allows your judge to understand what's happened in the debate so far and understand what they should be voting on. All right, so that's it for the video, guys. Like and subscribe, comment down below what you want to see next in the series, and I'll see you guys around. Jeff out.